Hi! The Railwayman, a 2013 war movie based on a true tale, will be the subject of today's Cinefilm recap. As the story opens, Eric and his pals are sitting in a coffee shop when Eric remembers a Thursday in the past. He decides to board another train at the Crewe to catch the Manchester-Edinburgh train at the Carstairs after finding out that it was delayed in an incident. On the train, Eric meets a woman named Patty, and they strike up a discussion and ultimately learn to enjoy each other's company. Once Eric reaches his goal, he is forced to face the unthinkable. He has fallen in love with her. Eric then exits the coffee shop and moves towards the train platform, wishing to run into Patty again. Fortunately, he finds Patty and approaches her, telling her it was simply a coincidence. Patty is happy to see Eric again, and he extends an invitation to visit his home. Eventually, they fall in love and get married. Eric had a nightmare one morning in which a Japanese soldier takes him to a Japanese prisoner camp where many other British soldiers are held captive. The Japanese soldiers are escorting him into a dimly lighted room. When Eric sees the room, he screams in distress and refuses to go inside, but as he falls down in his bed, he cries out in agony. When Patty notices this, she becomes concerned. As a result, she makes repeated attempts to talk to Eric about it, but he consistently refuses to discuss anything. However, Eric's memories of the past frequently upset him, and as a result, he always seems confused and depressed. One day, Patty goes to see Eric's close friend Finley to find out more about Eric's background. Finley initially resists telling her the truth, but Patty convinces him to. The scene then switches to a flashback of Singapore in 1942 during World War II. Eric seems to have been a British soldier stationed in Singapore. When they learned that General Percival had decided to negotiate with the Japanese and declare a ceasefire, the Japanese army seized the British Empire and took all of the British soldiers to a prison camp. They witnessed the other British soldiers being brutally handled in the camp as though they were slaves after the Japanese had the British soldiers work for them. Even after witnessing other soldiers in the harshest conditions, the British soldiers gathered in a tent one night to plan their escape from the prison because they did not want to give up despite the fact that the Japanese were exceedingly brutal and treated them like animals. However, they come to the conclusion that they won't be able to escape the awful prison-like location. Eric says that he has discovered where they are. He had been mapping the area and has determined its layout. He explains that they are currently in Thailand, where the Japanese are trying to build a railway line that would connect Thailand and Burma, which will cause lengthy train rides. Eric alleges the voyage to Burma is hundreds of kilometers long via mountains and jungles and that low-wage immigrant laborers normally perform it. He also believes they are now Japanese army enslaved people who are being forced to build the railway track. They decide to build a radio to acquire the information they need, nevertheless, because their leader Orlby is unwilling to quit up. The only person who is capable of building a radio is Eric. As a result, they begin gathering components for a radio covertly. Eric uses his minimap to locate them and conceals it inside a bamboo pole. A few days later, Eric successfully creates a radio that allows them to learn the location of the British forces at the time. The other squad is informed by Eric and Major York, two other high-ranking British soldiers, that the British Army is bombing Germany round the clock, every day of the week. The United States Air Force has joined them. Unfortunately, when the Japanese soldiers start searching for the radio, they also manage to find Eric's minimap. As a result, 4 British soldiers, Thorby, Finley, Withens, and Eric, are now implicated. The Japanese soldier then beats Withens mercilessly until he passes out, and Eric surrenders to spare the lives of his companions so they won't be tortured to death like Withens, who passed out in front of him. As a result, the Japanese beat Eric violently till his body parts suffered terrible injuries. Despite this, Finley and the other soldiers do everything they can to repair Eric's fracture. Later, a member of the Japanese secret police named Kempentai appears and threatens Eric with exposing the truth since they believe he tried to leak their intelligence to the British forces. Eric's hand has a fracture, but Kempentai fixes it with a rope whose other end is tied in the car, drags him outdoors, and then transports him from the Japanese prisoner camp. After being shocked to hear all of this in the present, Patty attempts to console Eric by giving him additional love and care. Finley encourages her not to discuss it with him. Eric, on the other hand, is unable to forget his history. The next day, Patty visits Finley's residence, and Finley hands her a newspaper magazine including a photograph of Kempentai. When Patty grants her permission, Finley gives Eric the magazine and also lets him know that Kempentai is still alive and currently employed as a tour guide in Thailand. Finley then suggests that Eric go to Thailand to find the Kempentai and take their revenge, but as Eric now has a family and values Patty above all else, he declines to seek retribution from the Kempentai. Additionally, Finley presses him to tell what the Japanese soldiers did to him when he was being held captive, but he refuses. Then, as Eric and Patty follow Finley to the station, Finley tells Patty that he will send a message to Eric warning him not to neglect Finley as Eric seems to be doing. He gets off the train in Warminster and hangs himself from a bridge after suffering from depression and trauma. After attending the burial of his dear buddy Finley, Eric vows to return to Thailand to get revenge on behalf of all British soldiers. He then visits the Japanese prison camp where he was tortured throughout World War II. When Eric reaches the camp, he discovers that it has been transformed into a museum. There, he sees exact replicas of the men who were made to toil away to build a railway route. Eric also sees Kempentai conducting the tourists through war-related scenarios. Eric says that he is a railway enthusiast when Kempentai inquires as to why he is creating the map. Yet, Eric is suspected of leaking railway intelligence to the Chinese. Following the departure of the visitors, Eric approaches Kempentai, who introduces himself as a Japanese pilgrim making his 57th pilgrimage. Kempentai does not recognize him at first, but he soon does in the flashback, where Eric and Kempentai are in the same prison room where Kempentai is interrogating Eric. They ignore Eric's attempts to convince them that it is a receiver and that he cannot send any messages using a receiver. The Japanese then imprison Eric in a small wooden cage without providing him with food, and he is subjected to cruel torture in order to provide a response. In the present, Eric questions Kempentai in the same way that he was in the past, but Kempentai now seems to have a gentle. However, he knows nothing else, and daily keeps to the same response and serene personality as opposed to earlier. Eric is curious as to how Kempentai managed to live after the British force crushed the Japanese. Back in time, the movie cuts to a battle between the British and Japanese armies. Kempentai poses as himself and introduces himself as a translator who speaks both Japanese and English since the British Army needed a translation as they lined up all of the Japanese troops who were due to be punished at once. Despite being released from his duties and punishment in the present, Kempentai claims that he saw several people slaughtered and buried, leading him to choose to strive for peace because he did not want people to forget the sorrow of war. When he hears this, Eric is incensed because he thinks it is a crime rather than a tragedy. He also accuses Kempentai of lying and being a criminal. After that, Eric finds the same stick that was used to beat them and breaks it. He also finds a block that was used to break a victim's hand during the war. Eric then asks Kempentai to place his hand on the block, and Kempentai huskily agrees. Eric is unable to exact his retribution because doing so would go against his ethical principles. Eric stabs Kempentai in the neck and locks him in the same tiny wooden prison. Eric enters the shadowy space where the Japanese had imprisoned and tormented him. As he does, he remembers a flashback in which the Japanese troops had violently strangled him by stuffing a water pipe into his mouth. As he remembers all of this, he continues to scream in terror while picturing his worst nightmares. He then talks to Kempentai when he returns. Eric says that his mother passed away when he was serving in the military and that he wrote letters to her while he was fighting. Kempentai reacts by saying that the Japanese government misled them about how the war would end. According to him, only Eric was able to inform them of the fact that the British were crushing Japan. Eric then shares Finley's last words, which were that he wanted to meet Kempentai and put an end to everything, even though Kempentai is prepared to die since he knows what he did was wrong and is responsible. Eric leaves Kempentai after realizing that he leads a bitter and unhappy life as well. He then strolls along the same railway track where he used to be made to work. He discards the knife in his possession, then goes back home, happy to see Eric. Patty, she asserts that she was terrified following Finley's passing because she believed Eric might suffer the same fate. Eric adds that because Finley didn't have a loving companion like Patty, his situation was special. A few days later, Kempentai writes Eric a letter confessing his remorse and admitting that what he did during the conflict was wrong and that he now regrets it all. He says that following the end of the war, he constantly recalled Eric. After receiving the letter, Eric decides to go back to Thailand and takes Patty with him. When they get there, Kempaitai approaches them and apologies to Eric. After that, Eric gives Kempaitai a letter in which he fully absolves him of any wrongdoing from the past and praises Kempaitai for his efforts at reconciliation, adding that sometimes hatred must be put to an end. Kempaitai thanks Eric after reading the letter and breaks down in tears. Eric and Kempaitai became good friends as a result, and they stayed so until Kempaitai's death in 2011. Patty also seems relieved to see this. Kempaitai passed away in 2011. Eric died in October 2012 at the age of 93, with Patty by his side. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thank you.